Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a huge idea from the physicist David Deutch, and it's not what you might expect. It's not about quantum computing or the multiverse. Not really. It's about something way more fundamental, what actually makes an explanation good, and how that one simple idea is the engine behind all of human progress.
Okay, let's get into it. To really get what Deutsch is talking about, we have to start by looking at the way we've traditionally thought about knowledge, a way that, as he argues, is pretty deeply flawed. I mean, this is one of those questions, right? It's been at the heart of philosophy for thousands of years. How can you be sure the sun will come up tomorrow? How do you really know that anything you believe is actually true?
For a long time, the main answer was this idea called inductivism. And it sounds pretty simple, pretty intuitive. You build up knowledge by observing things. You see one white swan, then another and another. After you've seen, say, 1,000 white swans, you make a generalization, a theory. All swans are white. Seems logical, right? You're just building a case from the evidence you see.
But here's where David Deutsch really throws a wrench in the works. He says, look, just predicting that the next swan you see will also be white isn't the same as explaining what's actually going on. You haven't explained the genetics, the evolutionary history, the reason for their whiteness. All you've done is spot a pattern and assumed it will continue. And we all know how that story ends, right? The pattern holds, right up until that first black swan shows up.
So, if just collecting observations isn't the path to real knowledge, what is? Well, for Deutsch, the alternative is that the real foundation of knowledge isn't about observation at all. It's about creating and then criticizing explanations.
But here's the thing. Not all explanations are created equal. Let's take a classic example. Why do we have seasons? The ancient Greek myth about Persephone being taken to the underworld is an explanation, but so is the theory about the Earth's tilted axis. They both try to explain the same thing, but one is obviously, well, better than the other. But why? What makes it better?
And this gets us to the absolute core of his idea. A good explanation, he says, is hard to vary. It's rigid, it's tightly connected to reality, and all the details in it play a crucial role. You can't just tinker with the parts without the whole thing falling apart. A bad explanation, on the other hand, is flexible. It's easy to vary.
This is such a brilliant way to see the difference. You know, with the Persephone myth, you can change almost anything. Why Persephone? Why not some other god? Why 6 months? Why not 8? The story basically still works. But with the axial tilt explanation, you can't change a single detail. The specific 23.5-degree tilt, the specific orbit, it all has to be exactly as it is. If you found out that, say, Australia and Canada both had winter in January, the entire theory would be instantly destroyed. There's no patching it up.
And this is exactly why being hard to vary is so incredibly powerful. A good theory doesn't just explain what is happening. It makes really bold claims by saying a million other things are impossible. It sticks its neck out. It says, the world works like this, and not in any of these countless other ways. That's how we actually learn something new. That's how we make progress.
Okay, but this isn't just some neat little philosophical trick. This is where it gets really interesting, because Deutsch takes this core idea and uses it to completely rethink the foundations of physics itself.
He's in the process of developing this new framework he calls constructor theory. And it's this really radical attempt to rewrite the laws of nature, not by talking about what will happen, but by explaining what can happen.
Let me put it this way. Most of physics, as we know it, is about taking some initial conditions, the position of a planet, its speed, and then using the laws of motion to predict where it's going to be in the future. Constructor theory asks a much deeper question. It asks, what physical changes or transformations are possible in the universe, and which ones are impossible? And what are the deep principles that explain why? Now, the ambition here is just massive. The goal of constructor theory is to be a kind of meta-theory that underpins everything else. We're talking about explaining not just particles and forces, but also abstract things like information, computation, and even knowledge itself, all using the same fundamental language of what transformations are possible and impossible.
So, you might be thinking, okay, a new theory of physics. That's cool. But why does this matter to me? Well, because for Deutsch, this whole philosophy, this commitment to finding good explanations, is the key to literally everything.
In his book, The Fabric of Reality, he argues that our deepest understanding of the world rests on 4 major pillars: quantum physics, Popper's theory of how knowledge grows, the theory of computation, and the modern theory of evolution.
So, what's the common thread that weaves these 4 huge ideas together?
You guessed it, they're all profoundly good, hard-to-vary explanations about how knowledge works. Whether it's the information encoded in our DNA or the calculations happening in a quantum computer, each one of these strands describes how knowledge gets created, stored, and transformed. The search for good explanations isn't just something humans do. It's a fundamental process of the cosmos.
And all of this leads to the very heart of Deutsch's worldview, which is one of profound and powerful optimism. He lays this all out in his book, The Beginning of Infinity. He makes this incredibly bold claim. Just let that sink in for a second. What this means is that every single problem we face, from disease and poverty to climate change, isn't a permanent flaw or a resource issue. It's simply a knowledge problem. It's a problem for which we just haven't yet found a good enough explanation. So if problems are just a lack of knowledge, and if there's no fundamental limit to our ability to create new knowledge, to dream up and test good explanations, then it follows that there can be no limit to progress. We are, just as the title of his book says, at the very beginning of an infinite journey of problem solving.
So that's the power of a good explanation. It's not just some academic idea. It is the engine that drives our entire civilization forward. Which kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. If our entire future depends on swapping out bad, easy-to-vary ideas for good ones, what's one popular explanation out there right now that might be holding us all back?